It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are joined by special guest Ann. Hello, Ann.
Hello, hello.
And we're gathered here to discuss Foreigner, the, I think, 18 or 19 book long at this point.
Oh, I think it's up to like 22.
Yeah, it's up in the 20s now. Yeah.
Foreigner series. We'll probably be mostly discussing the first 3 or so for reasons of concision.
Yes.
And
that's far more manageable.
Indeed.
With, perhaps scattered mentions of later developments.
Mm-hmm. And we've chosen to do this as a bonus episode because while, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, there isn't much in the way of wizards or lesbians in these books.
But they are
foundational to many of the books that we have already covered for this podcast.
Exactly. I feel like the Wizards versus Lesbians microgenre and / all of the like neo space opera stuff owes a massive debt to Cherry, both the Foreigner series and her Alliance Union.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So generally we start with a quick plot summary, and it is traditional to ask the guests to do this. Anne, would you sum up Foreigner for us?
Oh, wow. Okay, so humans, a ship full of humans intent on colonizing, building a new space station around a star, get lost and end up at a world inhabited by humanoid aliens. They aren't aliens, it's their planet. At basically sort of a STEAM technology level, and go down to live with them, and hijinks ensue. But humans end up isolated on an island, and there's one person who's sort of the go-between between humans and the Atevi, who are the actual inhabitants of the planet. And there's tea and assassination and political stuff, and it's super fun.
Indeed, tea is, as usual, symbolic of civilization.
It absolutely is, yeah.
And also the dangers of civilization, as Brent finds out, to his detriment.
Not safe tea, yeah.
Yeah, not safe tea, not safe grandma. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah.
So as I said, unless anybody wants to make a pitch for anybody being a lesbian, I think that we're pretty much wizard and lesbian free for this one.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, though I would say that Elicidi has such powers that she's practically a wizard.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. You know what? I'll buy that. I was going to say unequivocally, there are no wizards. This is very magic free. There's hardly any hand wavy tech. But I guess, you know what? I can go with Elicidi as a wizard. You could tell me Elicidi was anything, and I would say, yes, she probably is.
Yes, we do. This podcast takes a very expansive definition of what constitutes a wizard.
Yeah. Now, sadly, I don't think there's much argument to be made for lesbians.
There's not. There's one. I'm pretty sure that Lord Gagi is gay.
Definitely, 100%. Lord Gagi's absolutely gay.
Nominative determinism.
And these books do not have lesbians, and they, the main character is, probably bisexual, but in denial about it. But, he's definitely a cis man.
Well, I feel like we're going to spend a lot of this podcast talking about the consummate weirdo Bren Cameron, who is presented to us as our human everyman in what is, I think, one of the biggest jokes.
He's hardly an everyman, but that's see, we're already getting into why should I read this book territory as far as I'm concerned.
That's true.
All right, so why should we read this book?
So I feel like the main attraction of this book is Bren Cameron, who is a very odd character, but for me, a really super attractive character. And I'm not sure why. I spent a long time when I was first writing trying to figure out why I liked Bren Cameron so much, but why you shouldn't read this book. If you open this book and you get to the Bren Cameron part and you don't like Bren, you just need to close the book and put it down.
I'm not even sure I completely agree with that, though, because the first time I read it, I was like, why am I reading about this dude? And then I came back to the series, like a decade later when I wasn't a preteen. And, when I came back to the series a decade later with a bunch more linguistics and history academic training under my belt, I was like, I'm normally not that interested in like your standard male protagonist, but I find this man fascinating and have read like all 20 odd books. I haven't read the most recent two, but like, I find this man so weirdly fascinating, and clearly so does the author, because she just keeps putting him in situations and,
For 20 books.
Yes.
Right? And I mean he's changed a lot, right, over the course of the 20 books. We don't want to get into spoilers, but I think for me what I really like about Bren is that, for one thing, he is in fact almost the stereotypical hypercompetent science fiction hero. But he has no freaking idea. He's in over his head the whole time and is convinced he can't measure up to it and he can't handle it. And I really kind of like that, because very often you're a hyper-competent hero, which, I mean, there are times when that's just what we need. Somebody walk in going, I know what to do. And you go, yes, someone knows what to do. It could be me. But in this case, it's, sometimes even when we know what to do, we feel like we can't do it. We want to sit down and cry, and go, oh my gosh, the world's going to be destroyed and it's my fault. Which I think is a little bit more approachable as an ideal character, someone to identify with.
Well, I want to talk about Bren at great length, but probably after the spoilers zone.
Yes, I will say that, though, that this whole thing is, I mean, the entire series, like everything that Cherry writes, is just full of gender. And like Bren is your hyper-competent male, science fiction protagonist, but he's also absolutely the damsel in distress in every book.
Oh, yes.
He's, like back in his own society, he's like 6 feet tall and, an extremely important political figure. And then you take him to the Atevi where 8 feet tall is short. He's like suddenly surrounded by all of these people who just can, sort of pick him up and carry him under one arm and just think he's so adorable.
His bodyguard's always slinging him around when he's in trouble. I mean, he's practically sitting in booster seats when he,
This is Cherry's favorite trick to pull. My personal favorite is her series where the human male protagonist is the sort of princess wife of the alien furry woman.
Oh, the
Channer books. But Cherry loves nothing more than to put her men in situations like this, which is why we first meet Bren nude and wet, despite the fact that he's a diplomat and academic. But so I did also want to say that if you bounce off of Bren because he's so whiny and incompetent, then if you can get through the first book and a half, maybe that starts to change. But if you bounce off of Bren for other reasons, it's just going to be Bren from here on in. So.
Yeah. Well, until you get to like book 8 or 9, where you also get Kajeri's point of view. But still,
Bren is still Bren, no matter what. I had seen a number of people, this was years ago, who would be like, why am I just, this guy's whining all the time about not being able to get his mail? This is stupid. I'm bored. I'm putting this down. And I'm like, first of all, you've completely missed the point. And secondly, if this does not amuse you, then definitely you should go elsewhere for your
You're in the wrong place, yes.
Yeah.
You may also, again, you will find large chunks of these books. These books are all paced and plotted in essentially the same way, and you're going to have to be okay with that. And
right, which is that it's
brief periods of action followed by long periods of rumination and talking.
Yes. Oh, it's wonderful.
Exactly. And if that sounds great to you, then these are going to be right up your alley.
Yes, it's all political intrigue and tea, and then the requisite shootout, like in the last couple chapters.
Yes, sudden violence. Yeah, and then I also Cherry's writing style actually it can be very difficult to get used to, and she will not spoon feed you. Like there's a spoiler moment that I guess we can talk more about in the post after the wall of silence or whatever, the wall of spoilers. And which I had read the book 3 times before I understood what had happened in that moment, and it made the things happening at the end of the book make more sense. And it's because Cherry doesn't signpost it quite as like, did you see this, reader? Did you see this, reader? She doesn't do that. She expects you to keep up or drop out. Follow her or don't.
This is a big why you should read this book for me, because it reminds me of the prose of, the science fiction of the 60s and 70s that I grew up on, despite the fact that I was a 90s kid. So yeah, no, there is that sort of dry matter of fact, almost hard. It's hard social science fiction is the best way that I can describe it.
I would definitely call the only thing that isn't hard science fiction about this series is the faster than light travel.
Well, and I have to admit, in terms of hand wavy stuff, I said there was hardly any hand wavy, but there is the fact that the humans land on a planet with actual grasses. And humanoid aliens, who aren't aliens, it's their planet, who, for all intents and purposes, could just be 8-foot tall people with yellow eyes.
But that's all for the symbolism. That's
and
fine.
Yeah, and that's and she does the smart thing, which is you present all of that stuff up front. So you're like, look, reader, these are the terms on which I am engaging with the story. Either go with it or don't. So you know right ahead what you're getting into. And I almost don't count that as hand wavy because that's just like, this is the terms.
Yeah. No, and it's true that all of her aliens, even when you start to get into weirder aliens,
like the methane breathers and the
that's true. Like, other than her methane breathers, who are extremely weird, most of her aliens are sort of can relate in a way that humans would find,
languages
processable.
are translatable, senses are basically the same. The methane breathers, of course, are delightfully bizarre.
Yes,
but you can't see them very closely because of they're hard to convey, hard to put on the page.
Yes. Actually, speaking of the similarity between human and ATV, another reason where you might not want to, or one thing that might turn readers off, is that the ATV are quite Asian.
Oh yeah, that is an issue.
Especially the early books.
Especially early on, yes.
Especially early, they're very Japanese, in fact.
Yes.
Yeah, it is very Orientalist, the first few books. I like that as the series goes on, that gets less and less so. Like, the Atevi get weirder and weirder.
Uh-huh.
And I think that that's one of the joys of continuing to read, because, if they were just sort of, generic Asian idea, the sort of generic science fiction idea of an Asian culture for more than a few books, it would get tiring real fast.
Yeah, it absolutely would. Oh, well, and it also helps that, Cherry kind of knows what she's doing. Yeah, there's the Orientalism, and I'm not going to try and soft pedal that, but she also treats all of her characters like people.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So it's not like you've got, Bren's bodyguards being complete stereotypes, which is what you see a lot of writers who maybe haven't thought about some of those things or haven't got the skills. She's treating her characters with a lot of respect as people. And that does make a difference. But I totally could not blame somebody for opening up the book and going, yeah, right.
Right. Now, the Atavi are not monolithic, which is sort of the point.
That helps a lot.
But the very sort of divergent personalities, even within Bren's personal guard of high-class assassins, it's not an accident.
Yeah.
Yes, and the Atevi are not even linguistically or culturally identical, which is, again, really nice. But
from Cherry, they wouldn't be. That's what's so nice.
Yeah, but, and even this is true even in the first book, where she sort of sprinkles the occasional hint that, this is... I love a good unreliable narrator. I am on record in this podcast as being a big fan of unreliable narrators. And Bren, because it's told very much in close third, is such a great unreliable narrator because he has such absolute confidence about his assertions about, like, Atevi language and culture when it is just patently wrong.
Yep. He doesn't know nearly as much as he thinks he does. And he knows that, but he doesn't know that. Yeah.
Right.
I would love to get into that further, but I think we should go to the spoiler zone before we do that. So
yes, absolutely. Any other reasons? Oh, the other reason I would say for not reading this book is that, as the series is up to 22 books, so it's a little bit like adopting a parrot or something. If you get into it, it's a real commitment.
True, but that said, you can easily just read the first 3 books.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Stop. I thought she was going to stop there.
They come in sort of trilogies, at least until very late in the series. So you can just read as many trilogies as you feel like. Leora, of course, promised she was going to read the first one and then was like, well, I'll read the first trilogy. And now she is on book 8 or 9 and is really excited. So,
yeah.
they can just... it can turn out to be more of a commitment than you were expecting, I will say.
But a delightful commitment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say like the first trilogy is, I think, probably the most, coherent and like interesting with capital I of the whole series. But if you have gotten through the first trilogy and you're invested, then that really doesn't matter past that point. You can just ride through the rest of it and have a good time with these characters that you know and love and their foibles. Oh wait, what are we doing next? Content
Oh yeah,
warnings.
content warnings.
Content
well,
warnings.
There's a lot of violence.
Yeah, torture, kidnapping, poisoning, assassinations, no sexual violence. Just
to speak of. I will say also, these books, especially the first book, is quite harrowing. Partly because Bren has no idea what's going on, and people are being very mean to him.
Things get much cozier as the series progresses.
Right, the series, once it settles in, it gets to be quite cozy to the point where you're like, okay, I know that nothing really bad is going to happen to any of these characters.
Yeah.
Which is nice, personally. I think I would not have been able to stick with the series if every book had been as harrowing as the first. That said, I really love the first as a sort of, almost as a separate, as a thing apart from the rest of the series.
Mm-hmm. Well, I almost kind of feel like you're right that they come in trilogies. They absolutely do. I really feel like the first book was written, but the second and third weren't necessarily planned for.
Yes.
So the first book feels like it's self-contained. And then the next two books, Invader and Inheritor, really feel like they're all one book altogether. And then after that, the trilogies seem to fit together a little as she goes on. The trilogies sort of blur into each other. But I really do think the first book was, I could be wrong, I really think the first book was written with no expectation of going any further.
I think you're right. That is one more reason not to read the series, is that the names, every single book has a one-word title, and I cannot for the life of me remember which book is which. Every single...
call them by number at that point.
I have read the first 20 books at least twice, and, the first, 15 3 or 4 times, and I still cannot for the life of me remember which one is Invader and which one is Inheritor and which one is Precursor and which one is Pretender. I have to look up the list of the series every single time I want to, figure out which one I want to read next.
Invader is the second one of the first trilogy, and Inheritor is the third one, and Precursor is the fourth book. Those are the ones that are very firm in my mind. Once we get past Precursor, I cannot keep them straight.
All right.
Okay, so with all that said,
let me usher us gently onto the spoiler zone. Well, hello, my podcast friends. The introduction's reached its end, and we've tried to keep things nice and vague up until we reach a natural break. But like an hour of the contents of our brains still remain behind the wall of silence. So let's talk about Bren Cameron.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, let's.
A wet cat, if ever there was one.
Right, this is his moment, on Tumblr and in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I would love to be able to reintroduce him to people, despite the things about the first book that feel dated. It feels very 90s in a lot of ways. One of which is one of the things that will really start screaming out to people as you read it, which is this Bren's sort of inherent belief in the goodness and fellowship of humankind. In the first book before he learns better.
Right. The second and third book undo that pretty fast, given all the politics happening back on his home island.
Yes.
And then he flips over to being well, clearly the Otevi are just, culturally superior in every way.
Yeah.
Because they're so efficient.
Bren is a beautiful creature in that he is very, very smart, and he's also very dumb.
Yes.
He wouldn't have survived if he'd stayed on Mosfera, I think.
I think you're right.
Now, can you imagine him trying to do the academic job that he would have had to do, like negotiating tenure and trying to, get it on people's good sides for that?
He would have been poisoned by somebody else other than Elisidi.
Yes.
And who, and it would have been fatal.
But yes, this is part of the sort of the central joke intention of the first book, is that this is a man who is, as Benici says extremely dryly early on, before you know that this is Benici's form of communication, Benici being his sort of primary bodyguard / closeted love interest.
Well, I don't know about that, because Benici's trying real hard to set him up with his daughter successfully.
I don't say it's Benici who has that interest, it's Bren.
Ah, I see, yes.
But
I would have said Tubini, but maybe both Benici and Tubini.
Bren definitely, Bren
and Tubini definitely have something. Yeah, there's some.
They do with all their staying up late, drinking, and talking about relationships.
Bren longs for the company of a masculine companion, pretty much throughout the series. But Benici says, "You're the best there is," at the beginning of the first book, in his sort of dryly incredulous manner, and he's very, very bad at being a diplomat initially, despite the fact that he is the sole. He is the sole representative of the human race, and part of this is because he doesn't understand humans either, at all, as I mentioned, and this both blinds him to sort of understanding his own role on this planet, and also to understand the ATV, because his belief in the alienness of the ATV also stems from the fact that humans don't work the way he thinks they do.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the things I love about both the first book and then the series, is that the first book really is just about the fundamental alienation of being human, of how language and words and all the ways that we can communicate are actually just insufficient for forming any kind of genuine emotional connection with anyone, which is why, Bren, while he's being tortured, just goes, "Oh, I wish I were skiing." I can't even imagine, connecting with another person. And sort of the Atevi work really well in that first book as a metaphor for that, because they're, biologically incapable, sort of understanding that.
I have a whole complicated relationship with that.
I'm firmly of the belief that the Atevi are not actually very different from human beings.
Thank you.
See, that's my point, is that the rest of the series proves that completely false. I mean, the Atevi don't have a word for love, but as in, which is very Sapir Whorf, but
oh god, the specter of Sapir Whorf hangs over this.
Except that again, this is saved by Bren being a super unreliable narrator, because Bren and his bodyguards actually develop a word for love. It's just that word is salad, and it's an in-joke. But they're capable of saying, "Wow, we feel this deep emotional bond to each other." And it's, and maybe it's not identical, but it's the same, but no human connection is identical either.
I think that's true. I'm not sure. I feel like I'm on very thin ice when I try and assert what I think an author is trying to do. Because I know from personal experience, but I feel like the text keeps trying to still tell us that the Atevi are incomprehensible. Even when it's clear to the reader that they aren't as different as all that.
That's true.
But Bren is so much our point of view character until Kajiri arrives.
Yeah, that's very true.
And incidentally, until the very human adolescent Atevi Kajiri arrives.
Also, I mean, even in the first book, there's this thing where Bren is going on about, about how his human emotions and his bodyguards are just sort of listening patiently while he has an emotional crisis at them. And then Jago goes, "Oh, you're just like this random small heretical sect off by the coast."
That you've never heard of.
Right, that he's never heard of, and you don't really hear from them again, unfortunately. I keep wanting them to show up. But it's clear even then that the Atevi have things that are similar.
Yeah. And also the moment when he's being tortured and as far as he knows, he's dying, and where his mind goes is being out alone skiing. And his response to that is, "Oh my gosh, am I not human anymore?"
Right.
Like, that's a very human response.
It is.
And it's a completely understandable response. And and I go back and forth with, did Cherry intend for us to go, "Oh, come on, Bren, you're being stupid"? Or did Cherry, I don't know, what was she thinking then? And maybe it's just my idiosyncrasy that makes me ask that question.
It's entirely reasonable. Like, our editorial standpoint has always been, it doesn't matter what the author intended.
And you are absolutely correct, it doesn't. But for various reasons, I'm fascinated with the different ways people respond to something,
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that there are enough subtle little points in the text, and of course, one can never be sure, but that to undermine what Bren is saying about the absolute alienness of the ATV as we go, like the one that stuck out at me was he is ruminating at one point during the complete disaster the first book descends into, that the ATV have no word for trust. They have 15 words for betrayal, but no word for trust. And it's like, the concept of betrayal implies trust. Right. And it's like, that's obvious enough that it would, that's not the author making that mistake,
No. But also, Sapir-Whorf hangs as a shadow over all of science fiction.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
There's a long history of it being taken very seriously. And it's hard to tell at this remove how seriously an author takes it, but it's difficult not to engage with it because it had such an influence over how people were writing about language and psychology.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. I'm glad that we appear to have mostly moved past that as a culture and as a science fiction reading culture.
The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, also known as linguistic relativity, states that the structure of a language influences its speaker's worldview, and in its strongest form, it states that language determines thought, and that linguistic categories limit what a person can think of. If you don't have the words, you don't have the concept. This is generally and universally considered to be complete bullshit at this point in time, but that hasn't stopped a bunch of science fiction being written as if it was true. And the reason that I immediately go on to talk about Star Trek after this is that it reminded me of Darmok again. And also maybe Worf. I wouldn't put it past myself. Linguistic determinism again. I think it's possible to read Mosfera as a satire on Star Trek: The Next Generation's view of what humanity is going to be. Mm-hmm. This sort of very white, first of all.
Yes.
Like very extremely white bread white also. Human liberal sort of human affability zone where, where everybody's agreed that all of these principles are correct and that we're going to, act honestly and truthfully based on, centuries old wars. And like Cherry doesn't believe in this, I think, if I'm going to say what's in the text, and undercuts it very slowly and in a way that is designed to cause you maximum stress.
I think she doesn't bother undercutting it in the first book because we never go there.
Right. But as the series progresses, I think that actually the thing that marks Bren out, and this is actually one of the things that I wanted to ask you about specifically, Anne, because you do a lot in your books with neurodivergence. Is like, I read Bren as autistic on this, or at least like in some way neurodivergent on this reading. Like his inability, his love of rule following, his really like his need to, his like the way that the reason that he likes ATV is that he feels like he can understand them at a sort of like academic level, even as he longs for a personal connection with them, which he's also been incapable of having with other human beings throughout the course of his entire life, as far as I can tell. And that it's actually that alienness and his sort of that alienness, in quotes, even as he goes along talking incessantly about what humans are and what humans do, that puts him in the absolutely prime position to be the interpreter between Mosferia and the ATV Society.
It's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of him as a rule follower, not so much. Except in the necessities of his situation. But thinking of it now, it's kind of striking that at least to Bren, a knowledge of mathematics is essential to understanding Ragi, understanding Atevi behavior and Atevi language, which is a very sort of like, I can rationally figure all this out, which is kind of when your social skills don't come to you naturally, you're like, well, so what are the rules of this?
Precisely.
What is the script I'm supposed to be following? And of course, he's very good at math, and he can follow the math, and he can talk to Atevi.
And he's very good at following scripts.
He's very good at protocol.
Yeah. He's very good, right? And he's really into protocol. I mean, a lot of the time when he has disconnects with people, especially with other humans, he's like, no, this is my job. This is what I'm good at. I know the exact protocol here, and you're not following it. And,
right, he blames everybody else for not following the protocol.
Right, and he usually manages to browbeat the humans or occasionally step back and let ELCD poison the other humans into following his protocol. But he doesn't necessarily follow the rules, but he's always presenting himself as the guy who's the protocol guy, the diplomat, I know all the social rules and I follow them exactly. And the things that cause him stress are, oh no, did I misread the social situation?
Mm-hmm. And always looking for the subtext behind everything. And would you like to have tea? What did she mean by that?
Right.
Yeah. And I was also struck by, when he's dropped into a position where he knows exactly the parameters of the interaction, what the parameters of the interaction are supposed to be, he becomes almost a different person. And funnily enough, the first time we see this happen is with Elicity, because he understands, oh, this is an older woman. I'm going to be flirtatious and flattering with her, which happens to be exactly the right thing. And he's immediately fluent and does it. The tea, putting the tea aside.
Yeah. First she poisons him.
We kind of veered off the topic, but the point I was trying to get to is that it's fascinating to watch a man get really invested in the biological, neurological differences between human and Atevi when he himself is maybe not wired the same way as most humans. And he doesn't realize this about himself. He thinks he's the normal one, which is funny. And maybe what's even funnier is what eventually changes his mind is being exposed to physical torture. ABA works, I guess.
But yes.
And I still know, she claimed it was an accident, but
Oh, sure.
She claimed it was, no, I love that in the first book, she claimed it was an accident, and Bren was like, oh no, it must have been an accident. And by book 5, he realizes that she's about to poison the starship captain. And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to stand back and let this happen. And then, and then he's talking to this poisoned starship captain, and he's like, don't worry, she did it to me too. You'll get better.
I mean, and it's also when the frustration that he has when he's trying to chart or set up the tripartite connection between the station, the ship, the pilots guild, and the Mosfera and the ATV are oh man, these humans are so hard to deal with because nobody will make a goddamn decision. I want somebody to tell me what's happening right now. I want a dictator to dictate so that we don't have to go through all this.
Yeah, that is a little alarming in Bren's, in a number of cases. He does think that. He's like, it's so much easier if you can just have an assassin go kill them.
Bren is definitely an authoritarian at heart.
He is, no question.
And I mean, one of the things that I think makes this really interesting about sort of the alienness of the Atevi is that Bren basically only ever interacts with the highest of the upper crust and their servants. So, basically the most snobby, conservative, powerful people on the planet. we almost never see middle class Atevi, and we know that middle class Atevi exist, and they're really into like neon and like
TV.
you know. And television and, you know, trashy soap operas and stuff. And then Bren is sitting here with like his overflowing lace cups, you know, being like, this is like this classic drama from 4,000 years ago. But like, yeah, you know, your average Atevi who just lives in Shejidan, the capital city, you know, and like wants to put more neon on their shop and is mad that the zoning board won't let them. They must find him just as alien, you know, if not more alien than they would find your average Mosferan.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And actually, you see that with the spaceship workers, come to think of it. You've got sort of like these blue-collar Atevi and these blue-collar humans, and we've been told that like Atevi and humans can never mix or it will lead to another great war.
But they're all like talking to each other and, yeah.
Oh, solidarity? Can the Atevi survive class consciousness? Keep marks hidden deep in the archives.
Right. And of course, you also, even in the first book, you have smugglers. You can't have smugglers without some means of communication.
Yeah, it becomes clear very quickly that there's only this small point of contact between the two is very definitely not what's happening. Bren is not the only human who can speak Ragi very well, and he's not the only contact between the island and the mainland, and yeah.
Another thing that I caught on the reread of the first book is like I think that we can say that this is that the distance between Bren's observations and reality are intentional and reinforced in all kinds of ways. Like, because there are details that he never realizes that are happening in the first book about the connection between or about what's going on with the Atevi. Like the way that keeps being steered away from every window. And he thinks this is because of assassination. It's because they don't want him looking up to see the space station.
Right.
I think, yeah, no, you were meant, and I didn't read him like this in the first book because I'm the first time I read this book because I'm what you might call dense. But I think you are meant to eventually to realize that his understanding of the world that he is in and is responsible for maintaining is extremely limited.
Yeah, and that's one of the joys of that close of a third POV.
Yes,
is being able to show that. As a reader, it helps if you can pick it up, but it can take a while, right? It was actually the station itself that there's that scene where he's been tortured and they pull him out of the basement and Ilisidi says, yeah, we were torturing you. We just had to test you. Come out on the balcony where it's freezing and you can die of hypothermia. Look up.
Right. But
and he looks up. Yeah, he looks up. And it's not clear, or it wasn't clear to me, like the first 3 times I read the book, what he saw. So that when we get to the end of the book and he gets on the radio with Mosfera and he says, the ship is back. And I'm like, where the fuck did that come from? Excuse me, is swearing allowed on this podcast?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We're all grown-ups here.
And it was like the 3rd or 4th time through and I was like, oh, I see. He looked up and he saw the station and he saw Phoenix sticking off the station.
Yes.
But I didn't...
Yeah.
She didn't signpost it. She didn't say, and that's what he was seeing. She just said he saw, and then he went, oh my gosh, everything makes sense now. And I was like, oh, it does?
Right. Mm-hmm. I absolutely didn't get that the first time I read this book as a preteen. But I did the second read, I think partly because that had also been a plot point in the Steerswoman books.
Yes. Yes.
Which I feel like, honestly, if you like Cherry, you'll also like the Steerswoman books.
I think that's probably true.
So, but, and so because that had been a plot point there, I was like, oh!
That helps. I had not read the Steerswoman books. I only read them, within the past couple of years.
They're quite good.
Yes, they are.
So, yeah. So, okay. So we've gotten to talk a lot about Bren. Here's one of, I think, possibly the most problematic, hard to deal with character in the series for me is Barb.
Oh, yes. Oh, Barb gets no love. I don't think Cherry treats Barb fairly.
No. And, it's funny because in general, Cherry's books, nobody is their stereotypical gender anything. Everybody's weird in their social roles and contemporary gender embectations don't line up, our contemporary gender expectations don't line up in at least one way. Mm-hmm. Except for Barb.
Cherry likes men who express power in traditionally feminine ways, and she likes women who express power in traditionally masculine ways.
Right.
Barb is a woman who expresses her power in a traditionally feminine way, and that
Right.
is boring and borderline contemptible as far as Cherry is concerned.
And it doesn't help that in terms of the book's structure, Barb is not Jago.
Right. She's like exactly the opposite. She exists to be a foil for Jago.
And so whenever she comes on stage, she's not Jago, and she's going to be unsatisfactory. But I feel like throughout the series, we start out with, we don't even see Barb in the first book.
Right.
And in fact, it's implied that their relationship isn't even really that big of a deal. But when Bren says fiancé, it's not because they were fiancés. It's because he doesn't have any other way to say it in Ragi. Yeah. And but then in the next few books, it suddenly becomes Barb was his fiancé, and it was this complicated relationship, and it's a betrayal that they broke up or whatever. And I'm like, well, but that's not fair, because that's not what... But also, to be fair, Bren's hair changes color a few times in the series.
That's true.
There's one, I recall, I was on a Cherry fan board, and between... Bren has an apartment in the Bujavid, and he goes off on his trip, and he comes back, and there's a whole mess. And they get back into the Bujavid, and he's like, well, since Bren didn't have an apartment, he had to stay in. And a bunch of us reading on the boards were like, Bren has an apartment. Bren has an apartment. But it had been 3 books since he'd been there, and she'd forgotten that he had an apartment in the Bujavid.
Oh, I just thought he wasn't allowed back into the apartment because
she forgot.
Enough.
She forgot he had an apartment. I think somebody wrote to her and was like, but Bren does have an appointment. And she was like, I guess it was too trashed for him to go back to.
Yes, because
fine.
Which is, but, that's fine, because the Bren's apartment status basically exists to force him to live with a variety of cranky old, like the apartments of a variety of cranky old conservative Atevi, like the lords.
Yes, it was always more fun when he wasn't in his own apartment.
Yes,
right.
his feathers being ruffled, it varies. And like as the series progresses and as he becomes more powerful and knowledgeable, it becomes increasingly difficult to put him in situations where you could feel like he's actually being ruffled, which is why we had to bring in new like characters like Jace and Kajiri to be ruffled in his place.
And eventually Perkuyo and
And because Kajiri also is pretty good at ruffling him by doing things like running away from home and then getting lost on a boat on his on Bren's country lord estate.
But no, I think that there's sort of like, Elicity being the big exception, but this book doesn't like human women very much.
No, it doesn't.
Or this series doesn't like women
very
much.
There's what's her face, Sonia or Sandra or something, the one with the spider plants.
Oh yeah, very briefly.
Yeah, well, and she's in the second or third book, I can't remember.
But she's like never on stage.
Right.
And there are a few. There's an engineer. Is she?
There's Jin Kroger.
Jin Kroger, and the book likes Jin quite a lot.
They do, yes. And Kate, who only shows up occasionally, but the book also likes Kate. Even Bren really hates her at first. He's like, "Oh my God, you're gut angling for my position," because anytime humans want to start studying Atevi, he gets super touchy. But it's true, both Barb and Deanna, the first trilogy is really not kind to human women.
No, it's not. It
gets better as the series goes on. Even Barb actually gets better as the series goes on. Like, she eventually takes up with Bren's brother, and he's really unhappy about it. And he's really unhappy about it, but at the same time, he's like, oh, I can see the ways in which these two are meeting each other's emotional needs that I was incapable of meeting for either of them.
Yeah.
If you want to be generous, you could say that because it's such a close third person, the first trilogy is that way because Bren has issues with human women.
Yes,
and that would make sense.
And which I think he absolutely does.
Absolutely.
I think one of the reasons that Jago, and I'm just going to use the pronunciations that the audiobook did. One of the reasons that Jago is his ideal woman is because she, it's like, I'm never going to cross your boundaries. I'm only going to demand emotional things of you, like in the most minor ways or in ways that I don't understand completely. And then at the end of it, you get a giant woman of your very own.
Right. Who, to a certain extent, has to take orders from you.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And is never going to be bothering you about marriage or children or anything like that. Yeah, no, I think that it is reasonable to say that Bren is something of a misogynist, but probably also, given the state of atmosphere and culture, that's not maybe unusual.
Probably not. Yeah, he was actually Bren's mother is not treated very well either by the text.
No, I have to say, because yeah. So another thing of this podcast is that Isaac and I both had really awful mothers, and so I think that might be one of the reasons why I found Bren so sympathetic, because I was like, you've got so many problems. You have so many emotional problems, but like, boy, I do understand your relationship with your mother.
Yeah, this podcast generally is generally mom skeptical, but yeah, no, I maybe he comes by it honestly, but yes, it is good that he learned so many things over the course of many books.
Yeah, he does
eventually figure that out as well. So I have a possible translation for untranslatable kabeyu.
Okay.
Which I learned recently, which is from.
Yes, Kabyo is just froom. Actually, there's certain ways in which the Atevi are a little bit like, because they're Orientalist and, early, like they're sort of generic Oriental coded. And while that's often Japan, there are some ways in which it's a little bit Jewish, which, very appealing. But,
yeah, no, they're from being sort of adhering correctly to Jewish law.
Wow, okay, that does match up.
And in the like modern, more traditional Jewish communities, people will use frum just to mean, like Leora will say, "Oh, I'm very frum about the speed limit," which she is. She never goes above the speed limit.
But in particular, the way that the Bujavide has to be more frum than frum, or more kabeyu than kabeyu, because they are the moral exemplars, and the actual common people are probably not going to be bothering with it quite as much as the actual.
You're absolutely right. The kabeyu is like that. Frum is a great translation for kabeyu, and this is going to make my next reread of the series all the more delightful. Just properly frum Atevi. So
absolutely.
Okay. So speaking of properly from Atevi, except when it's inconvenient to her, let's talk about Ilisidi, because
Oh, Ilisidi.
So as far as if you want a female character who makes up for the deficiencies of many of the other female characters, you've got Ilisidi, who's just a delight in every single scene she appears in, because she is tiny and power hungry and probably assassinated both her husband and her son. And has no problems poisoning and then torturing Bren. But you cannot help but love her because, she loves riding giant lizard horses and political machinations, and she has a great sense of humor. And, basically she's just an example of how we need more ruthless grandmas, I think, in fiction. Like, really ruthless grandmas.
She's a fabulous, ruthless grandma, and it's a great antidote to the, the sort of stereotypical grandma. Here, have a cookie, honey,
Right, here, have tea, honey. It's poisoned.
Yeah.
Just from a sheer, writerly perspective, like we talked a bunch in recent episodes about how you can convey the charisma of a character.
Right, and because it can be very hit or miss, whether sometimes the author just has to tell you this person is charismatic, or sometimes you can be like, I can tell that this person's supposed to be charismatic given how everyone around them acts, but it's just not coming through the page.
And I don't know how Cherry does that, right? But she does it with Ilisidi. There it is.
I mean, it's part of it is that it is partially in the way that other characters react to her, in that she has the incredible loyalty of all of these, scary assassins, but more to the point that that Bren continues to like her, even though everything she does makes his life a living hell for the entire time that he's there. But she's a salad to him immediately, and even being tortured by her own men doesn't change that in any meaningful way.
Well, and I think in her favor, also, he eventually comes to be a salad to her.
Right.
Which does make a difference.
Almost immediately, I would argue.
Yeah, she's almost immediately charmed by him, and that's
it's just she shows her affection through causing him great physical damage,
and mental and emotional damage too.
Yes.
And it may just be that hopefully the reader likes Bren enough at that point that the fact that she's like, oh, actually, I do recognize you and like you, even if I'm sending you down to the basement to be tortured, that gives us a favorable view of her.
I mean, it helps that she gets a lot of good lines.
She does.
Yeah, you know? among the ATV who are all, at least the courtly ATV are all very serious and proper at all times. Like, you really do grow to, like, latch on to the ones of them who make jokes, which is why Benici is so beloved and why you really don't want him to die.
Yeah,
right.
during that first part where Bren.
I think Cherry also likes that kind of ruthless grandma character.
Absolutely. Like, what's her face from Sighteen?
Ariana Emery, the first Ariana Emery, is very much that kind of character, although she's not anywhere near as likable. Jim Kroger is a version of that same character, I think.
You're right, she is.
And I think that that's a character type that Cherry likes.
Well, that makes me feel even better about calling Lucidity a wizard, because, like, we've discussed that, Cherry really likes to do hard flips on these stereotypical gender roles. Mm-hmm. And the ruthless but charming old man with, an enormous amount of power, but the wit and, like, finesse to charm you despite how he's fucking you over is like prime Wizards versus Lesbians wizard. So
right.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right.
Like, just that degree of the the ability to basically subject somebody to pretty horrific trauma and still have them love you is a very sort of wizard, is the sort of wizard archetype that we look at a lot in this podcast, and Elicidi does that. It's just she's so charming that, I, even now, I'm like, yes, I love watching her on the page.
She has never done a thing wrong in her life.
Exactly.
Right. And it's like once she's like firmly on your side or on Bren's side in the later books, and it's like, aha, I mean, we love it when the wizard is in the party,
Right.
Yay, Elicidi's come on stage. She'll fix everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's also great, because that's also Bren's reaction is, whenever Elicidi shows up, first he's like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. If I don't handle this, I'm in trouble. And then he goes, but she will handle it. So all I've got to do is, back her up.
And it's true.
Yep. I would say that, like, Foreigner reminds me in a few ways of the Discworld books. And one element of that, I mean, obviously Discworld books are comedies and Foreigner is not, but
though it is pretty funny.
Yes, true. Is the sort of like, man, if only we had some really smart dictators in charge to fix everything, that would really be the best way to run human society. But another one that sort of goes with that is like, man, it's just really nice to watch people who are incredibly good at their jobs do their jobs, isn't it?
Right.
And that is Elicidi, that's Tabini, and that is Bren eventually, so you get that satisfaction of watching a good plan come off,
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And, also, one thing that I like about the books, just to go off a completely different direction, is, well, obviously language learning and stuff, there's no universals, but Bren's relationship to the language and the way that he deals with it is actually a pretty realistic depiction of somebody who's learned a language as an adult. Like, the way that he has to sort of wrench it, he can't, he sees people who can, like, slide from one language to the other, like Kajiri, who has been exposed to both languages when he's young. And Bren being Bren, he thinks that this is very dangerous. But, that sort of wrench of, okay, no, I've got to actually, like, flip a switch in my brain to switch into the other language. And once he's had, a day or two to settle in, he's thinking in the other language, he's dreaming in the other language. Yeah. But he needs that time. And I found that's like the way that Bren deals with his bilingualism versus like the way that Kajiri and Kajiri's little human associates, who I adore, deal with their sort of growing bilingualism, really reminds me of like the difference between my bilingualism as, learning Chinese and Japanese as an adult, and my friends who acquired their second language, usually English, when they were kids. And, that they can slip and slide. And, I mean, I can mix words in, which, I think Bren also could do if he didn't think that this were deeply dangerous and both offending his sensibilities. But, I appreciate the ways in which you watch him have to work for his fluency. Even after he really is the most bilingual person on the planet. He still always has to work for it a little bit, at least until the later books. And that I like.
Yeah.
Dreaming in our TV, the conservatives think that it's traitorous, more or less. Bren throws humanity away. Incidentally, this reminds me that there are ways in which the sort of the ATV are coded as the Japanese does continue throughout the series, the most obvious of which being the Atevi otaku that show up.
Yes! I love them! The ones who, because they're, fan-subbing the machimi that they're getting illegally, from clearly, their cousin in, on the mainland or whatever. But, and they cosplay, and Bren thinks that these guys are, again, deeply dangerous and a threat to the social order, and it's no, Bren, they just want to have, Ragi-Con and dress up in their lace coats and watch Machimi and be it's just like Blorbo from my Machimi.
And actually, one of the things I kind of enjoy about the series being so long is seeing the way that, for instance, there are no cell phones.
Yes.
In the first few books. And
right, because they didn't
Bren does carry his computer around, but there's no email. Because when Cherry's writing in the 90s, the internet was a thing, but it wasn't like everybody had internet. And as time goes by, it becomes very clear that obviously Mosfera has to have cell phones. Obviously, they don't have landlines. And very obviously, everybody's got email. And so she just oh, yes, now he has email. Now they have cell phones. Yes, there are otaku on Mosfera.
And there's a concomitant, view of, in the 90s, we still had some of that, the Japanese are going to eat our lunch economically. There are these fearsome people whose, superior management strategies dealing from their superior culture are going to, run the world. And, then 10 years later, anime.
Yep.
Right.
It turns out we have more in common than we thought. And so one of it is an enjoyment of silly cartoons,
Right. And you just know that if Bren could ever, get to meet any middle class, that if he ever spent more time at a Atevi university, there would be some, group of Atevi college students who are pirating Mosferan soap operas and fan-subbing them in Ragi and, dressing up like they see in their khaki shorts or whatever.
Yep. Throwing around English terms that they probably don't fully understand.
Exactly.
Oh, Bren would be so unhappy.
He would be so unhappy.
Yeah, and I haven't read the later books for a while, but the spectacle of him taking Kajeri's young associates aside and saying, now don't think that this is the human emotion called friendship, young people. When it's
right.
Yes, it is, obviously.
Yeah, right.
It's just it is very funny that even despite him growing and learning about all of the things, that's still so central to his understanding of the world that he lives in, that he can never really budge on that, specific point.
Well, and some of the reason he can't really budge on that is because of the specific history of what happened when humans came down to Mosfera.
Right.
And humans interpreted that as misreading emotions. Yeah. And so that's an article of faith with folks on, with the academics on Mosfera, that's what caused it. And if kids had grown up together, it would have been a totally different thing, is my take on it.
No, I think that's right. And actually, that's a good point when you say, because that's the academics' take, right? This is a very conservative academy. It's it's this somewhat marginalized department in the Mosferan Academy, and because there's pretty much there's only 2 career tracks for it. There's either you become a language professor, or 3, I guess. There's you get to be the one piety, which is a job, which is a job to applicant ratio almost as bad as modern academia today. And then you've got the CIA, the Mospherian equivalent of the CIA, where they're just listening to radio broadcasts and translating them. Or you can go into academia
and be a professor or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and so of course this becomes this incredibly conservative, and they're going to be deeply invested in justifying their own legitimacy. So it has to be about how this language, this knowledge must be gatekept and safeguarded because there will be another war.
Yeah, well, and the war itself. I mean, just the fact of the war and how bad it was, how essentially, as far as they're concerned, humans could have become extinct, and that's going to be under no circumstances does anyone want to repeat that. Well, except for the Heritage Foundation, but that's a whole other thing.
Right.
That's because they think
There's always going to be some people who want to do that.
Yeah, I do love that it's the Heritage Party, but it's basically just the Heritage Foundation. It's like, oh yeah, nope, they're still assholes.
Yeah.
Thousands of years later.
Yeah. So, and I was telling you this, Alexis, but it's like this sort of, like it's easy to imagine him as like Francis Xavier, or another sort of a Jesuit in the Imperial Court of China or something like that, where it's like these people are, aliens, and it's sort of what he gets maybe up to like Lafcadio Hearn. It's like these people are aliens who I really enjoy. Yeah.
Right, and you're right that he does initially he is a little bit like the Jesuits in the, Ming and Qing courts, in that, he at least sees his job as technology transfer. And Tabini is a little bit like some of the later, Qianlong or whatever, who's like, ooh, yes, no, do show me your new, except that, of course, the Qing emperors mostly just wanted calendrical reform and painting techniques and weren't actually interested in most of the other stuff. And honestly, some of the, at least in some of the Manchu documents I've read, the Kangxi Emperor subjected his Jesuits to similar levels of bullying that everyone does to Bren, being like, I'm going to cut off your beard. What you going to do about it? And then he feels bad. And then, the guy gets so stressed. And then the guy, soon after, this poor Jesuit, Father Pereira or whatever, gets sick and dies. And Kangxi's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have teased him so hard. Oh, well.
That's really good. No, I'm thank you for giving me an excuse to put in a jingle about Italian Qing court painters, incidentally, because they've been on my mind.
Okay, great. Castiglione and stuff.
Oh my God, they're so weird looking at those. Giuseppe Castiglione loved to paint a horse, and the Kangxi Emperor had a lot of them for him to paint. He painted them on silk in tempera and kept his chiaroscuro to a minimum. He just snuck it in under the hoofs occasionally. Looking at these paintings will give you a profound sense of cultural displacement, which is good for you, so I suggest you check them out. And also the horses are really fat and cute. But anyway, we're coming up on an hour of recording now. I wanted to, Anne, if you have, if there's stuff that we haven't touched on that you would like to bring up for us to discuss.
I'm trying to think. Not particularly. These books are just so, they're just so engaging, and I've often said that at this point I will read Bren reading the Shejidan phone directory.
Right.
If all it is that, and then meditating on how you could figure out the Manchi of each of the associations because of the way they're listed in the Shejidan phone directory. And then he has a cup of tea. I would totally just read that. And it's weird. I mean, it's weird that that's true, but it's true.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there are those, there are different kinds of interminable series, right? Mm-hmm. There are the kinds of interminable series where you feel like you're locked in a death spiral with the authors. They, sort of bring out volume 8 of their tome of, of like cat squashing fantasy. But then there are the kinds of, and this is another Discworld comparison, there are those series where it's like, I'm just slipping into a nice bathrobe.
Yeah, I just get to like hang out with these people.
A nice familiar
again.
sweater.
And Foreigner is definitely like, oh, I'm so warm and comfy. It's a feather blanket. It's, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, part of that is because there is sort of, even though it's much more hard-nosed than that, there is a kind of like, it's nice to imagine a world where politics could be solved if people were just smart enough,
Yeah. That's why they call it fantasy.
Exactly.
Right, because like even the heritage, everybody is like committed to their ideology. Mm-hmm. Some people are stupid, and some people are wrong, but everybody seems to be genuinely committed to their ideologies.
Yeah, they do, and you don't have a lot of that weird contradictory stuff where things just don't make sense. Like, why do you take that position? That just doesn't make... No, it's your heritage and I'm not. And yeah.
It's the kind of world that we wish we could live in, even with the assassinations.
Even with the assassinations.
At least they warn you first.
Right, you get a letter, right?
Exactly.
They file intent.
It's almost like a homework assignment, and it's like, okay, my job is to stay alive over the next couple of years.
And this is another reason, though, I wanted to see more middle class at Tevi. Is there's that great little scene in the first book where Bren happens to overhear a divorce, and
I'd rather have him assassinated.
Right. Like you realize you would get a lot more money if you just like sued him, and she's like, yes, but I want him killed. And Tabini's like, okay,
I wish.
Stamp.
I feel like that track of world building got sort of cut off because later. It's very clear that Tabini isn't involved in those decisions, that she should have gone to the Assassin's Guild. And I feel like that was just there to kind of show us a thing. And later when she had to work on the implications, that didn't fit. And I'm kind of sad about that because I also love that moment where he's like, you could just bring him to court, as you said. And she's like, no. And Tabini's like, well, all right then,
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of explain it in universe as Tabini's job gets a lot more complicated as he's like, suddenly after when the ship arrives and then he has a civil war. Tabini no longer has time to hear divorce petitions.
Well, and Bren's job also gets super crazy complicated at about the same time. So I guess we can. It also doesn't. It doesn't make sense. That audience scene does not make sense in the world building.
Yeah, no, I think the part of it is that we're trying to establish that Bren's job, as the Pi-D was like a Hundredman minor position, the way that he keeps thinking that it was, when in fact there's no way on earth that could possibly be true.
It couldn't have been. I think Cherry wants it to have been, but there's no way on earth that it actually was.
Right.
Yeah. It makes the ATV world feel a lot smaller than it eventually turns out to actually be.
And I think she didn't expand. She expanded it when she was writing more books, and she was like, "Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense."
Right.
Right.
All right.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
This was a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed hearing your thoughts about this and getting to talk about such an awesome series of books.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I've heard about y'all's awesome podcast and heard an episode or two, which is why I knew there were musical interludes. So I can't wait to hear the musical interludes for this one.
Excellent.
I'll do my best. All right. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bren Cameron doesn't care about music. There's hardly any in this entire series. At least I think so, but when I tried to Google foreigner music, a bunch of other stuff came up.